Hello and welcome to the special coverage of the Arab International Cybersecurity Conference and Exhibition, which is being organized by the National Cybersecurity Center. Stay tuned, we have more coming up after this. Welcome back to our coverage of the Arab International Cybersecurity Conference and Exhibition. We are very fortunate to have with us Mr. Jeff Moss, who is the founder of Black Hat and DEF CON. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now I'd like to start by asking you, what does this collaboration look like, especially from the point of view of DEF CON? What have your responsibilities been?
Well, yeah, it's been a 5-year journey to get here, and what we're trying to do with DEF CON and AICS is bring sort of a hacker mindset, a creativity and energy to complement sort of the more business side of AICS. And then so the idea is you have sort of the humans and the way people think and approach problems, and then sort of the technology. And what we're trying to see here with our first ever collaboration is, do people in this region respond to that? And we're really curious to see what the reaction will be.
And in your vast experience, what is the significance of collaborations like this? How do they lead to real-world developments in fields like cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Cybersecurity is, while it's deeply technical, it's also deeply social, because a lot of technical problems have at the core social problems. So how do you apply the technology? Who has access to it? Who pays for it? What are the human rights implications? What are the business implications? These are all policy decisions that have to be made. So even though you might be a super geek building out the best firewall, if you don't have direction on what rules to put in that firewall, it will never do what you hope for it to do. So I think understanding the needs of your business, of your government, is part of it. And so when you fuse the people who build the technology, the people who find the flaws in the technology, the students, the academics, the policymakers, it's a team sport. Everybody has to get involved, because we find if it's just the technology builders, they don't understand the policy implications, right? So you have to bring community together, and you can't really force it. It turns out the most successful communities are organic, right? Like-minded people coming together to solve a problem. And then sometimes they disappear, and sometimes they stick around. And then through building those relationships, you can learn, who do you trust? Who do you go to when there's a problem? Who can you tell your secrets to? Which products are reliable? And then over time, as your system matures, right? But you can't ever mature if you're forever putting out a fire, you don't know who to trust, right? You can't get the right products. And so, to answer your question, it's a long journey. You don't just show up and solve the problems. I'm expecting years, 4 or 5 years, before you can really see, is there an organic community? I always say I measure these things in 3 to 5 year time spans. There's no quick fixes.
I think what you said is incredible, because you're talking about, again, melding that like organic component of like creating community and as well reliability, even from a consumer's point of view. You know, you have certain products that you look to that you trust, and then other ones that you're a bit more hesitant on. So I think that it's great that you've talked about, you know, for example, that organic element as well, and it shows that, you know, it feels like cybersecurity, they might seem very nebulous and very tech focused, but there is a bit more woven into the fabric of it. And now I'd like to talk about, DEF CON is also hosting training sessions here.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about the learning outcomes associated with those sessions?
Yeah, so it's interesting because every region has different focus. In Bahrain, it's very focused on the needs of the country. So the classes that were interest, AI, ICS, OT, aerospace, you know, bio, all the things that the country itself wishes to develop. So a little bit less on sort of free-form individual development, and more on here's what we hope the skills the country can evolve. So we had our first ever, about 70 people, which we thought was a success coming into a region. And already we are getting requests from countries in the GCC wanting to also develop training for them. So I think there's a real hunger for the training, because what you're getting is not a product-specific view of how to approach ICS. What you're getting is sort of an expert practitioner's view. Here's how you make this decision. Here's how you balance off. In this problem space, you have 3 options. Here's why you would pick. And I think that fundamental learning, people are really hungry for, because I think what they're used to getting are product descriptions, but what they really need is the knowledge to inform them on which product to select.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so far with your experience here in the Kingdom of Bahrain, have you seen anything within the cyberspace framework that's particularly stood out to you or impressed you?
It's interesting because years ago we did Black Hat for 3 years in Abu Dhabi. And they have a very high percentage of foreigners and very low percentage of Emiratis that practice. And here in the Kingdom, it's about 50-50 or 60-40 citizens in the NCSC, in the cyberspace versus. So it's much closer to the citizens here, much more hands-on. So I think because they're much more engaged and they feel like more ownership of it, as opposed to, it's a contracted out problem to some other vendors. Here it just feels like maybe more authentic, like they're just more interested. And that's why we're really looking forward to the next 2 days to see how does the local community respond. One of the ways we'll be judging if the community responds is the kinds of questions they ask. One of the big things in the hacker mindset is the freedom to fail. You have to be able to try something new and fail and learn from it. But in some cultures, some Asian cultures, it's not okay to fail. And so it's very hard for them to advance their skill, and at the same time they show some weakness because they're not 100% right. So if people here are open and willing to talk about their failures and willing to explore and share what they've learned, I think that's a very positive community characteristic. And if Bahrain can exhibit that, I think there's a lot that can happen here.
Absolutely, and I think something you may come to notice here in the Kingdom of Bahrain is that thankfully, we understand that failure is kind of part of the process.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, that is sort of in any field when you want to develop, obviously. I mean, that's just going to be part of the process, part of experimenting, and that's. I mean, you probably again know this better than I do. That's what leads to better outcomes because you understand the system, kind of in all states,
right.
Rather than just a default of success, success, success. Now I'm curious for those of us who are a little bit removed from cybersecurity.
Yeah.
What are practices, or what do you think are things that we underestimate that could better contribute to the collective, whether that's as a country or as an organization, in contributing to tighter cybersecurity?
I mean, there's a lot, I think, of myths and misinformation in the space. One of them I like to point out is you're never going to buy a product and solve the problem. And so people who tell themselves that they can either fix the problem, it's much more. So for example, my father was a doctor his whole career, and he did not wake up in the morning and tell himself that he was going to solve cancer. He was going to fight cancer. And if you're fighting cancer, you're working for better outcomes, better quality of life, better treatments, understand the mortality of the disease. It's a journey, right? Security is a journey. But if you think you're going to wake up and solve it and be the hero, no. Bad guys will always find a new angle. There'll always be a new challenge. AI-generated attacks, So it's better to have that mindset of the continuous learning than to be able to say, I'm a failure because I didn't solve the problem. And so also that means that little acts can also make a big difference. Just being aware of what a scam call or a confidence trick is when you get that email, right? As soon as you have just a little bit of awareness, all of a sudden I don't worry about a lot of this, because I've trained myself to identify the characteristics of somebody trying to scam me. And so I think and we talked a little bit, it's also an innately human thing. And so you just have to have that sort of spidey sense that says, is this enough? How can I get around it? Yeah, they tell me the system's secure, but I've never gotten an email like this before. And you just have to sort of be aware, not take everything at face value, and generally when scams or intrusions are detected, it's because one employee said, something doesn't seem right. And they pick up the phone and they call the director of IT or their boss and they say, did you just send me that text message? And they're like, no, I didn't send you that text message, and it's just a little bit of that initiative. And the bad guys are counting on you not doing that.
I think it's very accurate to say that I think when it comes to tech, there's a healthy dose of skepticism that you need. And like you said, taking that initiative, because I think back to my own early days, especially like the first few times I used a laptop, and thinking an antivirus was automatically the solution to everything.
Yeah.
And even today, they try to sell you that because they're a product at the end of the day.
Right.
But like you said, with just a little bit more literacy or a little bit more initiative in the field, you kind of learn to be like, that doesn't seem completely right. And that can kind of save you, some devastating consequences just because you've been that little bit more skeptical. This entire initiative, being in cybersecurity itself and a massive undertaking like this where you're giving these very high quality training seminars that people have really been looking forward to, it's just, again, colossal in scale. So I'm just wondering, is there anything else that you'd like people to take away from this entire experience?
I think if I have to distill it down for DEF CON, what we want to bring is more of a way of thinking. So in InfoSec, it's a lot of skills development and tooling and the tool chain, and that's absolutely necessary. But I think the higher value is, how do you think? How do you approach the problem? When do you know to go left instead of right? Because that's more like knowledge and wisdom, and that can inform everything you do. And that kind of bubbles out of that hacker experience and mindset of wanting to understand the technology so deeply that you can understand what it can do in such a way maybe the original authors didn't even understand. And one of the examples I give, this is very effective for really young kids getting into it, is picking locks. And so at our big DEF CON, we have a big lock picking table, basic simple locks, and there'll be like an 8-9-year-old girl will go there. And she knows in her mind locks are safe, they're secure. So she's very skeptical and she picks up the lock and her dad's there watching her. What are you doing, Dad? This is never, and she pops the lock opens up and her eyes get really big. And now her world just changed. Before, locks were safe and nobody can break into them. And after that, she's like, oh, they're not safe. You just need to understand how they operate. And now that, well, what else is like that? Is a car like that? Is a computer like that? And you've created this sort of path for lifelong learning of things are not always what they seem. And that's what we hope to plant here. So if I can plant a couple seeds like that here that can grow, then that would be a success.
Absolutely, and I think it goes back to what you said, not taking things at face value and understanding how they work from the inside out.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very illuminating discussion, and I can't wait to see what the outcomes of this are. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us on the special coverage which discusses the developing field of cybersecurity in the Kingdom of Bahrain.